gonna break some misconceptions about analysis, because I truly do believe that the majority of people just, when they get thought like, well, how do you analyze and stuff like that, just forget everything about it and just continue with the way things have worked previously, with a gut feeling, rather than breaking this down as an actual concept of how is this done and how do we actually analyze stuff to the deep extent or something like this. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about like lots of concepts that people throw around but not necessarily know what they mean, like mechanisms, impacts, and everything like this. So first and most important thing about the argument itself, and the main problems that we identified yesterday when we listened to people who ended up in the intermediate stream, is first of all that you're under-analyzing points that you should analyze way more, in terms of that you're jumping from point to point rather than having a coherent analysis throughout the whole thing. The gut feeling, and like there is no like rule of how much you should analyze, but one of the reasons why you are carrying your like a phone to time yourself is to actually time how much are you delivering one single argument. And usually the rule of thumb is if you're delivering an argument in under a minute or minute and a half to 2 minutes sometimes, you're under-analyzing it probably. You're missing a nuance in this argument, you're missing the point in this argument or something like this, which is to say that it doesn't mean that your argument is completely false and nobody's going to ever buy it or something like this, but it does mean that in a more sophisticated room, somebody's going to have more analysis than that. Somebody's going to have 2 minutes of analysis, which will in the end make it true. So the issue and the difference is, when people go into debating, like you usually try to mimic the style that you had, like when you were fighting over coffee with your friends and stuff like that. But the difference is, like, and this is the difference that I tell about like two types of arguments, and like usually people make the first one rather than the second one. This is like this narrative argument, which is built on premises that like I should believe what you're saying because you're saying it, and it has some logic, but it's not like rooted in like 3, 5 or how many reasons, which makes it very vulnerable to anybody questioning it and taking it down. So this usually means that, and usually the rule of thumb for judges, however much analysis you do to an argument, that's how much it will take, how do you say, another team to take it down. So if, for example, your analysis is based on like one premise, like the whole analysis is based on that, I just need maybe two, like one premise and one sentence. I'll probably need just 2 sentences to beat it from, how do you say, my opposition in these sort of streams. So this is why it's usually very easy for people when they're more advanced to just dismiss almost everything that you say, because the analysis is not really. So it's not just about like what time you spend analyzing stuff, it's also the quantity of like dependent reasons for something being true. So let's then delve into how is this being done. This was just a setup for this sort of situation. So, but before that, it's very crucial to have structured argumentation. I'm going to show you my sexy structure that I like to usually use. So this is the thing. It is crucial for reasons that will become apparent. Second note. So cool. So this is just a cool thing to remember this by. So let's start from the statement, and then obviously we're going to spend like 99% of this workshop on analysis or explanation, but like let me emphasize some points before that. So usually people just glance over what do we want, what do we want this statement and stuff like that. It is actually very crucial, especially as an ESL speaker, an EFL speaker, like people who are not from England, US and stuff like that, to have a clear, how do you say, sentence of what are you going to prove before you prove it. Specifically because this is a persuasion game, right? The judges are usually not perfect beings who just encompass everything, and like we value judges based on their ability to track even what teams do not explicitly say or something like this. But oftentimes people are just going to dismiss if they are not sure where are you going with the argument, and then you analyze that thing. But it might become like very tough for people to actually connect your dots from point A to point B to your impacts. So usually the advice for the statement is, at least at the beginning, to have like what your actual impact is, like, I don't know, less violence, more female participation or whatever, as a statement. So from the beginning, I want to know clearly what is your impact going to be and what are we heading towards in this argument, in this association. And then, like, this is basically like if you're going on a trip with somebody, saying to them, oh, we're going to Split or something like this, rather than driving me around and then I end up in Split. So I might be cool with ending up in Split, but I might get lost along the way with you if you don't tell me that explicitly. So it's very, like, being very explicit of what are we doing more or something. This is very cool. Then, like, let's just move on. But like, I'm emphasizing this because like it's very difficult to follow people. Explanation, and that's where usually things just go crumbling down in people, because like people usually don't get what's the enough analysis, what do I need to base my premises on or something like this. So there is a very cool and crucial, how do you say, point that, and like buzzword that we're using, and this is this mechanism. So think of an argument as like like a watch or whatever. Mechanisms would be each of the cogwheels, like the small ones, or something that are making the arguments work. What are the mechanisms usually? So usually in debating, debating would be impossible if every premises would challenge, right? So if we were to challenge everything that somebody said, like, oh, Earth is round, or something like this, or like sky is blue, it would be very difficult. So there are obviously some of the things and some of the how do you say, stuff that we say that are going to be accepted by other teams, and they're clearly accepted in the academia or something like this. Obviously, this doesn't mean that it's how do you say, impossible to dispute some of these claims. It just means it's very difficult for the other team, and this is what the incentives bring. So what does this mean? Mechanisms means that you are pooling your conclusions rather than telling to me a story like, okay, so we implement this policy, and then the right wing rises, and then the right wing, I don't know, beats migrants, and then how do you say, we have the instability in the country. This would be an example of a narrative argument with the intersection of maybe characterizations in between. The thing that mechanism does is just say something that is, how do you say, not unchanged, but there's something that is very difficult for them to challenge, and then your conclusion should be derived from that. So for example, say similarly, if we pass this policy, people would fear, I don't know, the loss of their jobs, and like the fear of like pressure to belong to, how do you say, a certain group, and pressure to not disappoint, how do you say, your wife, your parents, and your, how do you say, social circle, is making you paranoid, is making you like fear is something that is irrational, hence it's making you very susceptible for somebody to come and say that he will save you, that he's going to be a strong man who's going to protect you against all bad, or something like this. So this is much more sophisticated analysis than the first thing, which means that you're basing your conclusion on something that is like psychology, sociology, economy, or something like this. So you're drawing small snippets and small bits from the things that you know about the world, or something like this, and then your conclusion is derived from that. So what is usually going to be challenged is the correlation between what you said and the how do you say, conclusion, but what cannot be challenged probably is that people are irrational when they're feared, or something like this, or that people fear, how do you say, not being able to provide for their families, or something like this. So some of these things are just like true facts, and by connecting these true facts with stuff that is disputable in your case, which is like, will the right wing actually rise? Who is going to then, how do you say, be horrible towards like minorities or something like this? This is very crucial and very important in terms of analysis. So just the way to practice this and the way to do this is to just come up like every debate and everything that you do, just to have this in the back of your head, and just to like collect them like cards, like Pokemon cards over the years, right? We're gonna go through some of them right now in order for me to show you what do I mean, and just for it not to be one sentence that I just said or something. But like what I want you to do is just, this is not an exhaustive list that I'm gonna do now. This is mostly just to show you and illustrate the mechanism of the mechanism. So how does it work? So let's start. Like, it's usually very cool and crucial to break them down into like their academic fields. I mean, it's not going to be that academic, but like in the academic fields in some manner. So but then again, just one brief thing. Why are you doing this in this sort of situation? Is because, like, in comparison to you talking with your friend, your mom, or something like this, nobody's challenging you as much as your opposition side, or as much as the side opposite towards you, because the crucial incentives that differ in real life is that, like, you should view debating as sport, as somebody, you have all of the incentive to challenge everything that the other side said, even if it's sometimes, how do you say, maybe true or something like this. So this is what very frustrates people or something like this, because, like, if you were to tell your story to your friends of, oh, I went and get drunk last night and it was amazing or something like this, in debating sense, there will be emotion. This guy believes that Miloš got drunk last night or whatever, and, like, that would be challenged so much. Did you really? Where did you go? Ah, you cannot remember this thing or something like this. It would be just like a drill in a, how do you say, trial or something like this. So in comparison to any other like conversation, you get so less challenged in this sort of situation. So you, in the expectation of somebody challenging something that you didn't really anticipate, it's very clear and not very clear, not very, very important to have this. So mechanisms, what do we view them as? So let's talk about psychology. So it's usually very cool, as I said, firstly, fear, any fear. So, like, fear of death, fear of embarrassment or something like this can be used to tell to me why will people act in a certain way, why do people, I don't know, believe religion, why do people, how do you say, why are people going to vote in a certain manner or not vote in a certain manner, why do people support some policies, like, I don't know, criminal justice policies that are, how do you say, very harsh towards the people in prison in this sort of situation, which means that usually, and this is the conclusion, it's not just fear, that when you fear for yourself, you usually overestimate how much does it actually, how do you say, how much is actual likelihood of something happening to you, or something like this. And the crucial point and the crucial, how do you say, explanation here will be how does fear come to be, or something like this. So this is where usually the statistics it's more likely for you to die being trampled by cow than being killed in a terrorist attack, but, like, people fear terrorists more than cows, right? In this sort of situation. So just by something being very present in the media, something being very present, how do you say, around you, something being very gruesome and foreign, leads people to fear and leads people to overestimate their chances of something happening to them, or in contrast to something else. So that would be one, for example. The second that you can use would be, for example, confirmation bias. So, for example, if you want to talk about, like, usually people, when they talk about, I don't know, breaking of stereotypes. So if you talk about breaking of enclaves, or, how do you say, moving people from one place to another place, or, how do you say, teaching something in schools, or media portraying something in a certain way, one of the better ways to talk about, like, to nuance the discussion of why this will not be as effective, or something else, is confirmation bias. So confirmation bias means that we usually filter out the, how do you say, things that ideologically do not align with our view, and we're searching for validation of our views in this sort of situation, which means it's very hard for people to change their minds, because, like, usually people know that there is a contrary opinion, they just rationalize to themselves why this is not true. So, for example, even if you know a minority person, or something, this is why, for example, when people talk about this contact theory, or if people knew each other more, they would hate less, or something like this. Like, you usually, if you have the confirmation bias, which majority of people do, you would usually just, how do you say, characterize that person as an exception rather than like a rule or something like this. So if you met a black person and you're a racist and you like that black person, you would just say, oh yeah, but like this person is just like the nice, amongst all of them who are horrible, but one nice person or something like this. So you would find a way to rationalize to yourself why your beliefs still stand. It's very hard for people to think about it. So one cool mechanism that I don't know how to call basically is why people also do not change. How do you say? Why people are very hard in changing their opinions, especially when they get older. Is if you change fundamental opinions about yourself, like what do you think about gays, LGBT, or how do you say? What do you think about the other races or something like this? This means the mechanism would be called like people want to perceive themselves as being good, right? So every one of us wants to think of themselves as a hero in their own movie, wants to think of themselves as like somebody who's very like good and moral or something like this. If you change your opinion, if you change your belief or something like this, the cost of you is then you're rethinking every action that you did, every hateful thing that you said or something like this, which is like a questioning your view of yourself as a good moral person or something like this. This is somebody who is like a very outstanding and very cool or something like this. You're questioning every decision, every discrimination that you did against black people or other ethnicities or other genders or something like this. So this is one of the, so that will be one of the mechanisms that can be, how do you say, how do I call this? People want to burn themselves as good. So, cool. Let's move on. But like this illustrates how do you come up with this. There's obviously thousands more in terms of this psychology thing that you can do. But like this illustrates that these are like small snippets that are usually it would be very difficult for you to tell me that it's not true that people want to perceive themselves as good, right? That's something that is very hard for you to challenge. I'm not saying that it's unchallengeable. You can just say maybe there's some, how do you say, there's some different examples. But like generally, this is something that is true, which means that generally the conclusions I derive from this might be more true and sound more sophisticated and nuanced if I say it or something like this. So basically, what I'm doing with these mechanisms is breaking it down like literally like a textbook. How do you analyze stuff and like breaking it down in a manner. So, for example, sociology. So mob mentality. So this is also one of the things where you can how do you say explain certain factors in terms of why people when they're grouped together are less likely to how do you say speak up. Like this is also connected to belong. So for example, if you're in a group, you want to be perceived by the members of this group as somebody who's valid. This is, for example, why people who are usually non-violent or something like this, when something in protest becomes more violent, they do horrible stuff. This is why people in war who previously couldn't do something do horrible stuff in a group or something like this, because like you perceive yourself and you get into that state of mind of, I want to belong, I want to, be protected, especially, for example, if you interconnect two mechanisms or something like this. So this is also a very, very, very cool thing. Usually, one of the arguments will not necessarily just have one mechanism and then you go on. They will be interconnected with some of these things. So you can, for example, talk about there is a fear, like if you go to war, there is a strong fear that you won't come out alive or something like this. So in this sort of situation, the best way for you to be alive is to stick to your group who is going to shoot the other people for you or something like this. So you then end up, in order not to be excluded from this group, you then end up following this mob mentality and committing horrendous crimes or something like this. So this is the logical chain of how you can explain, for example, why people in certain circumstances would commit something or not commit something or something like this. Also, if you want to go a step further, you can also, if somebody challenges that, you can also go a step further. For example, this is like if you want to root it in biology and say belonging to a group was evolutionary, something that was very good for people or something like this. So they have a pressure, like psychological pressure, to try to fit in with a certain group or something like this. You can obviously talk about different theories in sociology about class, about people connecting in a certain way, like empathy, empathy, and how do people empathize with each other or something like this in a group, and how do people empathize with, more, for example, So for example, people empathize more with people that are very similar to them. This is a very crucial, for example, analysis that led a couple of teams to win Worlds and Euros with in this sort of situation. So for example, if you talk about like interventionism, like you should intervene or something, or not intervene or something like this, usually it's very low, how do you say, people have a very low threshold of, I want to help a group that is completely foreign to me, that's different religion, different ethnicity, or something like this to me. So for example, this is why in Somalia, when America intervened during the 90s, in 1992, after the Battle of Mogadishu, when people saw two of the American soldiers being dragged through the streets, literally, and it was broadcasted on live TV, literally America pulled out in the next 10 days, which left the country a bit in chaos in this sort of situation, which doesn't like say that the intervention was good in the first place. It just says like pulling out too early because like people have the empathy more towards the soldiers of their own or towards their citizens rather than anybody else is something that is very bad. And these are the ways for you to explain why people will act in that way or not, in nothing other. So let's then move on to something else. Like let's talk. So you can talk about, like, if you talk about biology, you can talk about, how do you say, self-preservation instinct. So you can talk about, like, why people, even in horrendous situations, have this, like, I don't know, why people in horrible situations still don't commit suicide and don't do stuff like that, and are still gonna still endure some of these things, because, like, basically this is rooted in your genes and rooted in your, how do you say, biology of your body, or something that is telling you, that, and is convincing you that you should keep on even maybe when it's horrible for you or something else.
What are the best types of notions to use biology as a mechanism?
So usually, if you wanna talk about, I usually use biology to explain moral philosophy, which is usually I connect it, if I want to say that people have less, how do you say, culpability. This is usually criminal justice. If you want to prove that people are not as guilty as the opposition is saying in a certain crime, one of the good mechanisms is to just talk about, look, we do not have as much free will as people think. We are determined by our genes, by our talents, by what we are good for. We are determined by, how do you say, our society, and like this is the sociology, by what society taught us, what religion we were brought in. We're also plagued with the self-preservation instinct that is keeping us going even in horrible situations. This is, for example, usually the three things that I say, and then, for example, from that I draw conclusions that people usually do not have as much culpability for their actions as they don't. So that will be one of the things. But if I just said, if I in contrast just said people are not as guilty because like they didn't do, how do you say, they're not as guilty or something, that would be way worse than if I give three reasons why I think people are not as culpable, why I think people do not have as strong, how do you say, free will or something like this, that is rooted in something that I cannot disprove, like that. So society influences the way you think or something like this. Like, it's very hard. Or whatever. So for example, then if you can go to the others, like religion. So that's what you saw yesterday. So one of the more important things to explain is why, and this is why in religious debates this is a crucial thing. The reason why people are, how to say, people are fearful of death and what comes after. And if I convince myself, and if somebody convinced me that there is an eternity of hell or eternity of bliss or something like this, almost everything that I do now in this sort of situation, in contrast to this eternity in hell, is like way less. So I'm willing to sacrifice more. Like the whole range, from like being a suicide bomber to like not, how to say, eating some food or something like this. So just religion's most powerful mechanism of like control or something like this would be the existence of the afterlife and the existence of heaven and hell, because like the eternity is a number. It's very hard for people to grasp. the eternity of horrible suffering is even worse for people. So that's a very cool and crucial thing that you can say why religious minorities or something like this would act in a certain way. Why the backlash would actually be very meaningful for something like this, even though people usually cannot prove this, or why the calculus of people. So this is, for example, a very crucial thing in the debate about. There's a basic debate about priests being forced to report crimes they learn about in confessions or something like this, right? So that's a pretty basic thing. But without this mechanism from the government side, you can literally prove nothing. Because people say, oh, but you will not go because you will fear being in prison. But if I say, but there is another competing fear that if you don't confess and if this is denied to you, that you will also go to hell or something like this. In this sort of scenario, it's easy for me to prove that some of the people would still go to confession and still confess this crime, and we will still, have some, justice in this sort of situation, whilst on the side of the opposition and the side of the status quo, they can first of all be horrible people and kill people and be be criminals, but then confess these things, and then God will forgive them, and then they will feel better about themselves, and they will feel that they're going to heaven or something like that. So we are removing them this option or something like that. This is how you can practically use one mechanism to prove your point why something will happen, because if it stands and if this is not proven, the correct opposition is just to say no, but they will just not go to church, and then you lose all of the benefits because nothing happens, and then they are correct. So this is if you talk about and if you translate what does a leader mean to a certain group, he's a conduit to God. So for example, this means that you as a believer, not every believer, but especially the more hardcore ones, believe that what a leader is saying is literally God speaking through that leader or something like this. Which means that by defying the leader, you are defying God in this sort of situation, which is then again connected with this heaven and hell paradigm or something like this. But explained in this way, it's much more powerful than just I'm just stating this argument. I cannot quite fully.
Can you explain that again? I didn't quite connect with that leader point.
Leader is a conduit to God. So if you are a religious person, you believe that God. You believe that God is speaking through that leader. So which means that if you're fighting and if you're against this leader, this means that you are most likely, going to hell, or you're most likely defying God in this situation. This is a translation. So it's not just you're defying a person or something that is there, but you're defying somebody who you believe is like a conduit to God or something like that. And you can then derive a lot of power or a lot of manipulation that can go there. You can also derive very positive stuff from that in some aspects or something like that. Then if we talk about politics, if we talk about politics, and as I said, everything that I do now is not definitive. You can have at least 10 for each of the things that we just said. I just want to illustrate all of the things so you are thinking in right directions or something like this. So this is a very obvious one, and this is the mechanism that people learn first. When they do stuff. So this is basically connecting what somebody is doing, and everything here that is connected with people acting in a certain way is connected, and how does emotion impact their interest in some way, why would they do something, why would they do something else. So by politicians wanting to get elected, you can derive so many conclusions from it that is gonna, that is going to be very good for proving your argument. So for example, a couple of them, this would be the overarching mechanism, but a couple of sub ones would be short-termism, which means that if you are elected on 4 years period or something like this, you have this short-term bias of I need to win the next election, which means that I do not think as much of the long term because I might not be in that long term if I fuck up the short term currently. Which means that incentives in the current system is to think about the short term policies and to push hard changes towards somebody else This is like seen in every Balkan country policy and stuff like that, with no reforms to pension system coming, with like ruining the environments or something like this, because or borrowing money from any institution, IMF or whatever, because literally you are reaping the benefits of that, I don't know, borrowing, whilst other people will have to pay it in the future, which means that you are.
How to, for example, explain the other way, that people will actually believe in the long-term politics? Which sort of mechanism?
They are not. So people are not. I'm not sure. But you can have a motion that incentivizes that in a certain way, right?
Okay.
So it's just about, this is something that like just true. But like usually the motion about this will be something that tries to change this or tries to, how do you say, think about it. So for example, this is where we had a motion in Budapest, which was like basically this house will only allow people with high levels of empathy to vote, or something like this. One of the problems that you say is that people who are not empathetic just think about like the short term, and like this would be the classic short-termism versus long-termism, and how will people these perceive, and how will the politicians cater to that preference in some sort of way. Second of all is like this majoritarianism or whatever. So this is a mechanism that says that, and this is usually a very huge problem that people don't get, that every policy that you propose alienates somebody. So as much as you gain some people, even with the most sensible policy, some people will be against you after that or something like this. So usually the policy debates is talking about how many people will be dissuaded by the policy that you're proposing, in contrast to how many people you are gaining by this policy being proposed or something like this. And just by talking to me what the majority will do, or what the people who are most important for these people will do, is something that is very crucial. So for example, a Democratic Party in the US can pretty much count that black people are going to vote for the Democratic Party, which means that this is why they're pretty lazy in terms of proposing new policies, in developing, like, this is why even in democratically run, Democrats run countries, you still have a lot of poverty in terms of black communities, even though they're preaching, oh, we want to help them, because like they pretty much do not have as much incentive to do something, because these people are never going to vote for the other side, but just by being something, you can count on their vote, and this is pretty much how they get away with this. Especially because, like, as I said, like, if you want to get elected in the short term, you're thinking about the most priority that you can do in the status quo. So this is bringing us to. And I'll talk more about this a bit later, but this is like, so this is like, so this means that like whenever you give resources to one place, you do not give it to the other place or something like this. This is why redistribution is sometimes needed and necessary. This is also connected to the politicians, in a certain way, because like the way that we're dividing the resources, and this is why people, when they talk about, but we should obviously build more education, more schools, like give everything, like that's for sure true, and like. But the problem of the current debates and why we are not doing things even though we think they're very sensible is because like everything that requires money needs to be pulled from someplace else and given to that cause or something like this. And by losing some of the constituents, by like doing something like this, you might lose power and then you might, I don't know, die or do something like this. Then again, supply, demand, or whatever. What else? Moral hazard. So I'm going to just list them because we're going to go through them in the economy lecture later. Not everything, but we're going to go. But like these are some of these. Media. You can talk about like you can, how do I call this? So for example, like you want to get currently the way as a media company to get money is to get as much clicks on your articles as possible, which means that their media is more sensational. This means that it's incentivizing more polarized views. That it's incentivizing more partisan, partisan divide between the media networks, because it brings more leadership and people are more for this. Because like, yes, it's alienating, I don't know, conservatives if CNN is just bashing Trump, but it's getting you more liberals to read your sites. And similarly to Fox News on the other side, they know that they're alienating a lot of liberals, but it's not their target audience, and they're moving more towards the niche, how they say, issues or something like this. You can talk about like social media algorithms. So for example, the things, and usually how these things work, is that things that get, they say, most responses and most comments on these things are usually the things that go out on top. This is on Twitter, this is on YouTube, this is on stuff. So the algorithms prefer engagement, because this means that these people are going to see more ads or whatever. But this usually means that things that got on top are the more controversial things, because the things that get more comments is not people just all agreeing with each other and be like, yeah, you're right, but it's mostly people fighting with each other and being horrible towards each other or something.
I'm not sure how correct that is, because for example, in YouTube, YouTube algorithms do not, I would say, incentivize politically incorrect language. I would say that it's in social media's interest most of the time to be very left-leaning or politically correct. So
sure, but no, but like that's just true for them banning Miloš or these people, but that's not true for like swarm of people who are fighting.
For example, if you upload content on YouTube that is politically incorrect, the chances are that your content will be demonetized or even removed.
True, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about...
But I think that this is strongly correlated with what you said, because I think that being politically incorrect is what could be like considered something that would increase the engagement and be controversial.
Sure. But then again, these people otherwise would get less known. And you can say that banning of Marjanović and these people led them to actually, and that's actually empirically true, that these people getting banned, getting demonetized, led them to get more money in the end, because more people were willing to donate afterwards in their private donations, which is vastly more money that you can get from somebody clicking on your thing or something like this. So the incentives lie there as well. But I'm mostly talking about like engagement in terms of commenting, in terms of what gets on top of the Twitter newsfeed, on the hashtag or something like this. This is people actually fighting against each other. So yeah, sure, maybe for the extreme content, things get removed. But still, even for the moderate left-leaning content, stuff like that, the things that come out on top are the most extreme levels of this. So for example, if we talk about feminism, things that are going to come on top are not going to be the most sensible feminist view of this thing. It's going to be the most radical view, because most of the people are going to disagree, and then some people are going to fight with these people, and then the third people are going to bash both groups and say everybody's horrible or something like this. And then the people who have the most platform in these things are not people who are saying sensible stuff. We need to, I don't know, have the same equal pay, or we need to end sexual harassment. It's people being triggered and people saying we should, I don't know, ban men in bars or something like this, right? Because this is the more controversial thing, more people want to answer that, more people want to answer the people who answered, and people are just overall fighting or something like this. This is like why campaigns, why Gillette wanted to do the ad that they did, is basically because they knew this was going to lead them to so much more publicity, because somebody's going to fight them, somebody's going to defend them, somebody's going to fight both sides, and then third, like post comments are going to just fight everybody and fight reality or something like this. So it's usually based on like what brings people to react more versus what brings people to, how do you say, and this is usually a mechanism of how you can prove a couple of things, not just that, but like why social movements have a very huge problem of the internet age, because like without a spokesperson, Black Lives Matter is going to be tied always with the most extreme versions of their like reading or something like this, who are going to write kill all the cops or something like this, and then somebody's going to say fuck you, and then they're going to just fight all around and increases polarization, which was empirically true because like polarization currently is like on the all-time high in certain situations. So like these algorithms are basically increasing or are incentivizing polarization and people fighting and bickering with each other in this manner. So this is how it will be presented. Like obviously. These 7 are not exhaustive. You can obviously use all of the other things. There is philosophy, morality, that's the same thing. But like morality and stuff like that. There is like social, basically just social media ones. But there is international relations ones, the international relation mechanism or something like this. But what I wanted to do with this exercise is just to show you like what is the process and what are you thinking of when you're trying to analyze, and then I would encourage you to just like over your debates and stuff like that, think of your own and then try to connect them. So the criteria is first that it's hard for other teams to challenge what you're saying. So it's hard for them to say, oh, it's not true, that's bullshit, or whatever. And second of all, that it's relevant to you making a conclusion that you want to make in a certain way. So these are the two, how do you say, things that tell you whether you have a cool mechanism or you don't have a cool mechanism, or something like this. So by breaking these things down, it will become easier for you. And currently, for example, if I went to debate, I wouldn't need to think about these things. I would do these things on my own, and like every top room or something like this, and things that you like, even the best debates that you watch, and people say, wow, how are they? Like, this is what they do. You just people fail to see this because they see mostly like rhetoric and stuff like that. So this, for example, if you saw the Thessaloniki finals, which people are amazed about, the people are usually amazed about like these sentences, or the global poor or something like this. Was the most impressive things about these speeches is the level of detail, where they draw their mechanism, how did they prove their stuff, and how they connect stuff, which is like like not indefeatable but irrefutable, and then their conclusions are way better after that. So this is like deconstructing some of these debate points. So this is for this is when we talk about like this is when we talk about the mechanism. So does anybody have a question about mechanisms per se before I go on to the other two? Return to sexy. Being sexy. No, definitely not. Okay, cool. So just, I hope you got this. I think this is the most important thing that you can get in the debate. Actually, the most important thing that you can start doing in the debate is try to break down the game as it is. The problem with debating is that this is a sport, but usually it's very hard for people to grasp the rules, so it's a very complex sport. So this is trying to get you closer to get the sport as it is. How does a judge think? What do we value as analysis? What are we missing when we say, oh, you didn't have an analysis, you were missing your mechanism? We're missing a thing that where your, how do you say, argument is rooted in. So lastly, this will not, so if nobody in the room has mechanisms, we're gonna make a call, and you might get a first, that's fine. You might get a first because like nobody had a mechanism, then the narrative arguments and things like that work, and that's fine. But like this is why it's very easy for people when they come into that room, when they're on the next level of debating, to win every time and not lose a single time, just because on the level of analysis, I can concede most of the things and I just prove my stuff like with one more layer of analysis, and on net by BP rules, I would be winning this exchange or something like this. So on the next level, and this is like this mid-range rooms, usually it happens, and this is why mid-range rooms are usually very easy to judge, because usually one team does some of these things and proves things and they get first. The second team is closer, but they don't really prove it. The third team is sometimes just does this narrative thing, which is smart, which I'm not saying that this is a bad argument, but they're like doing this without like, the proving, which then you say you had a very good idea, but you didn't prove it that much, you should analyze it, it's very frustrating to people. And the fourth team usually doesn't have an extension in that. No. But that's usually the way it goes. Okay, so let's talk about the example and stuff like that. First of all, people put too much emphasis on examples, which means that they believe that if they can come up with an example, they have proven their argument and they have delivered a thing. This is, first of all, I think it was never crucial in adjudicating the debate, does somebody have an example or not. And it's never going to win you the debate completely, but it is going to make your argument sound stronger if you can ground it in some way. But what people are not doing in this sort of situation is explaining what happened and assuming that we all know what happened in your country or in other countries or something like this. It's very cool and it's very crucial, and that's usually what people do in the IR debates when you, how do you say, have some countries or something like this, and you usually then draw from previous experiences. Oh, not NATO failed in Libya or something like this, and they fucked Iraq, so they will probably fuck Syria or whatever, something like this. This is usually very easy for the other teams to disprove, and you usually feel very frustrated because you feel you use your knowledge. They're very stupid, they don't know shit, and judge also doesn't know shit because obviously you're right because of these examples. So the issue is, examples shouldn't be used as a way to prove something, it should be used as a way to emphasize something. So the more important part of that would be the mechanism and would be the explanation thing, but the second part after that would be, how do you say, the mechanism. One more thing that I actually forgot. So it's usually, at least for the beginning, very cool to have how do you call that? To have the habit, to go into the habit of every premise that you want to prove, to at least to try two independent mechanisms or two independent reasons why this is true. Sometimes you will fail, but just try to think of your head and question that thing on yourself and just two reasons why this is true. One and then two or something like this. So this is very crucial because it's making you think about a certain way and a certain issue. Usually if you go into like a better debates, people will claim they have 5 or 6, which is sometimes what actually happens. Sometimes they lie and they only have 2, but they spread it around or something like this. But it's very crucial to at least start to go into this mindset that I cannot just say one sentence why something is true and then go to the next, which is fine. It can be completely logically sound, but it's much easier for me to disprove, and it's going to take much less time. So every premise that you have in your case, give me two explanations at least. Obviously, you can do more or something like this. And second thing is, how much deep can you go? And this is the rule of thumb of these 5 whys or something like this. Just going 5 times questioning the premise or something like this. Maybe sometimes it's obvious, might lead you to an answer eventually of like, the right wing will rise. Why? Blah, and then blah, 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 or something like this. So just try to go in depth, at least 5. So the argument can be seen as like the structure of a lot of deductive reasoning, where one sentence leads to another sentence, then leads to another sentence, or something like this. So in this, how do you say, vertical thing, you should try and have like 5 premises. 5 premises that go from one another, but inside of these premises, you should also have, and you should think of this as textbook, you should also have at least 2 reasons why something is true in that, inside of that thing. So for example, a proper argument would look something like, not SSS, but something like this, like for example 2, and then this would be 3, and you get my point. Like obviously after that you can do, but like 1 leads to 2, 2 leads to 3, but inside of 1 I will have 2 reasons why 1 is true, and then go to the next one or something like this. Lastly, let me see. Argument. Where is it? So usually, if you want help with doing this, you can make a template for your argument or something like this. This is what I just have taught my kids. So this is, for example, how it would look. There's 5 layers of analysis. There's line where you can draw and do something like this, and then This will make you a lot more structured in your thinking, and this will make you actually feel more of these like 5 reasonings, because you will feel worse about yourself. This is obviously not a perfect thing. We wanted, when we practice with our kids, we wanted to emphasize having more analogies and stuff like that, so that's why we brought here. This doesn't mean you always have to have an analogy, you always have to have an example. This just means that this is sometimes very cool and crucial. Cool. So, and lastly, this is just a practical tip. Whenever you have a couple of things to say that are on the same, like this horizontal line, like you're saying, I have 2 or 3 reasons or something like this, it's very crucial for you to enumerate these reasons and to say 1, 2, 3 or something. This sounds very stupid, but like especially as an ESL speaker, EPL speaker will listen to you way more. And because, like for example, in deliberation, when we are fighting, are you third or first or whatever, when I'm fighting with my wings, again, if I think you're first and they think you're third or vice versa, we have 15 minutes. We cannot in 15 minutes, theoretically, we cannot go through every speech and what nooks and crannies you did or whatever. But what we can do is, they had 3 reasons for this. What were these 3 reasons? So it's way easier. So it's way better to say 3 reasons, but say 1, 2, 3 in terms of reason, than have 10 reasons overall, because then we'll get lost and people will not remember this part. So this is more of a psychological persuasion trick than anything else. And actually, like I know that it's stupid and it shouldn't work, and like everything should be perfect, but it actually worked for me in getting better placements. So just do it or something like this. And okay, so in terms of this is in terms of example. So, but this is not really that genuine, because example doesn't mean just example. Example is just for it to be sexy. But the example basically means all of the other things that you can do to prove stuff that are not actually in the analysis, which means stuff like analogies, using statistics, using using empirical studies and stuff like that. So let me just briefly talk about the analogies, because I think they're the most underused way to explain a thing. And analogies are actually the only way to win a principal argument. If you talk about one of these things. So for example, like every time you get like, a principal argument, or you get some sort of situation, like it's usually everything that the judge is judging is based on their moral intuition of how something in the world should look like and how something should work or something like this. And it's usually the motion, because motion setters try to be edgy, it's usually tied to one side rather than the other. So this house would allow people to sell themselves to slavery or whatever the motion suggests of you. Usually the judge will come, slavery? Oh my God, no, or something like that. So it's very crucial and important to try, analogies would be your way to either make your policy sound more sensible by tying it to something else that happened that is pretty mild, or make their policy sound very insensible and horrible by tying it to something more extreme in this sort of situation. So to illustrate, if I talk about the motion, this house believes that people have a moral obligation to donate all of the money above the bare minimum for them to live, or something like that. So this is usually, people view this as a very God-heavy motion in debate land, because like, fuck, I mean, how do I prove that people should not live, or people should, we will solve poverty with this motion, how do I fight this, or something like this. By translating and by trying to increase their burden, this is the only way for you to win. For example, the good analogy from up there, and the good way to actually try to present it, is to, for example, talk about, like, analogously, you should also be morally obliged to give your kidney away, right? Because you can live without your kidney, similarly with how you can live with bare minimum of money that you can have. Somebody else can have this kidney and live in this sort of situation, but it will severely impact your life. Does this mean that you should, be morally obliged to give your kidney? So that means that the other side must accept this in order to be morally consistent with their principle, but it also means that you didn't win by this metric. You didn't just like, oh, poof, what do you say now? And then you win. No, but you made it more morally palpable for a judge, because like Now it's not a debate about like giving money, like greedy bastard, but it's about giving your kidney or something like this, which is more analogous towards this or something like this. So you're trying to increase their burden or to decrease yours by talking about this stuff in the first place. So similarly to slavery, you can talk about what are all of the other stuff that we are allowing you to do that is similar to slavery, like capitalism, or I mean I'm pro-capitalism, but I like to make it. But like that are like I don't know, that are like taking a mortgage in your house, which is basically making you a slave to the bank, which you have to work, or you'll be homeless or something like this, or all the other stuff. So that's the only way to win some of these debates, and this is also true for other, even policy debates, for example. So for example, if we talk about West should cut off ties with medical institutions in other parts of the world that do not adhere to the ethical standard of experimentation or something like this. So opposition, especially in that debate, that was the Euros debate, or something like this, wanted to be like, oh yes, but how do you say, but we will save so many lives. Yeah, we will save so many lives or something like this, like they will be saved. So this is a very cool, how do you say, way to prove your stuff and be like, by that logic, and this is like, by that logic, you would also presumably want to remove medical standards everywhere altogether, right? Because if your metric of your side, if your principle is we should maximize saving lives, here all of the other stuff that would maximize saving lives, but that we are not doing under the status quo. For example, if you wanted to save and minimize the amount of victims in the world, you would presumably incarcerate and preemptively imprison people who have the high risk of committing a crime, right? Before they even commit it, right? But we are not doing this. So by this sort of analogies, you're trying to increase what they need to defend and decrease what you do need to defend. So this is just briefly, yeah. And lastly, because we need to finish soon, like in 2 minutes or 3. Lastly, just talking about impacting. Usually the issue with impacting is that people do not go deep enough of what does it do, what does a certain policy do. So it's usually very cool and crucial to think about like 2 things. One, go deeper into the psychological impacts, and like specifically on a single person. Not in terms of the broad society, like what does it do in terms of that, but also whatever you think is a bad word, like the rise of the right wing, or I don't know, backlash or something like this, needs to be impacted way more than you're doing currently, because backlash doesn't mean a thing. This is why people usually lose with backlash arguments. This is a new trend, because this doesn't mean a thing. So some people will protest. What does it mean? If you're leaving it up to me to think whether this is, how do you say, going to be so severe that the governments will topple, heads are going to roll, or it's going to be just people protesting and nothing happening, because the Balkans are used to protest with nothing happening, especially in Serbia, horrible. Yes. So in this sort of scenario. In this sort of scenario, you have to go a step further of what does this backlash going to do? Is it gonna make other people fearful of the group? Is it gonna make minorities feel uncomfortable about it? Is it gonna spark international crisis? What is the step that is tying your people being pissed towards then something else? Second thing is like even the rise of the right wing or whatever. What do they do or something like this? Are they making coalitions less palpable or something like this in the multi-party system? Are they, especially because like usually people say the right wing will rise in Germany or whatever, and the answer to that is but they're never going to go into power, and then they sit down and then you lose the debate. But it's not like that. It's not that there's no harm. They are locking parts of the parliament towards somebody who cannot participate in the government, which means that you have to create coalitions between both big parties, the left and the right, and you can see the instability happening there. You cannot pass any policies because you have to make so many compromises or something like this. So some of these things can be like can go a bit further. So just by something being accepted as bad doesn't mean it's necessarily immediately how do you say bad. But like lastly, this psychological impact is very, very, how do you say, cool in terms of how would people feel about their daily lives, how would people feel about their neighbors or something like this, how would people interact with them, with themselves, with each other, if this policy is passed, and just going into this individual psychology is very cool and crucial, how do you say, practical thing that you can do to impact your stuff more. It's also very cool to try to think similarly to the mechanism, to try to think of this, how do you say, at least two impacts about the debate that you want to have. So lastly, I usually at this point just, how do you say, make a graph in order to show you a thing. So usually you can think of an argument on a spectrum, like you can position it on a graph. So the argument should simultaneously be true and be, how do you say, relevant or something like this, right? So truthfulness of an argument is being proven by mechanism or something like this, but simultaneously you should prove why this is relevant. So for example, on this scale, something can be 100% true, but completely irrelevant. For example, if we prove that in the intervention of Syria, I know, 1 minute, that in the intervention of Syria we will harm a lot of turtles, we might harm a lot of turtles, but this is completely irrelevant. Simultaneously, if you prove that the Third World War will come if we invade Syria, or something, this is very relevant, but this is very hard for you to prove. So on this spectrum, you should balance your arguments to have impacts, to have, how do you say, mechanism which are going to prove the